standing, the first variable we can manipulate to either make the exercise easier or harder is lever arm. Lever arm refers to where our Redcord equipment, in this case the Redcord strap, is touching the body. So on Soraya right now, we've got the strap is touching her near the elbow. The strap is closer to her shoulder. Anytime the unit is farther away from the hand or the foot, that's a short lever arm, it'll make the exercise easier. If we were to move the strap out to her hand, that would be a longer lever, it's further out on her arm, that'll make the exercise harder. We'll show an example of how this looks in the exercise. So right now we've got the short lever. Soraya's going to do a leaning forward exercise. It engages the core, a simple exercise here. She's got the short lever at the elbow, then she's going to come back again. So using that principle, if that was too easy, we want to make it harder, we'd move the lever out to the hand. This adds an element of instability, more challenge to the core. So she's going to lean forward like she did it the last time. This time here though, we've got this long lever through the arm, like I say, harder for the core. So she's going to come back again. That is how we can use lever arm in the exercise program to make an exercise easier or harder. The second principle is suspension point. In our standing position, suspension point refers to where Soraya is standing in relation to where the ropes are mounted to the ceiling. Right now we have her standing basically directly under the unit. That would be a neutral suspension point. The easiest will be if she's standing in front of the suspension point, and it will get harder as she moves backwards. So in our same standing leaning forward exercise that we saw a second ago, she's in this neutral suspension point. She's going to lean forward. This will be a bit easier. So as she leans forward, because of where she's standing, this is a little less demand on the core. So she'll come back again. So to see how that would be harder, if we move her backwards, her suspension point moves. She's behind the suspension point now, and she leans forward again. This is a bit harder on the core. There's actually a longer lever on the core. So if that first one was too easy, you could move where you're standing on the floor to make it harder. The second position we'll look at is kneeling. In this position, there are 4 variables we will change to make the exercise easier or harder. The first 2 variables are exactly the same as standing, so we have a lever arm and suspension point. Remember, a short lever is always easier, a long lever is always harder. Suspension point, if we're in front of the suspension point, it's easier. If we're behind it, it's harder. The next 2 variables are instability and rope length. To make an exercise harder, if we have greater stability, that's easier. If we make an exercise more unstable, that's harder. So we'll look at this leaning forward exercise we did before. Right now, Soraya's knees are farther apart on the ground. That's a greater base of support. This will be a bit easier. So she's going to move forward like we did again. There we go, coming forward, good form there, good. Coming back. So now we'll bring her knees together. That'll make the exercise more unstable. It'll be more challenging for her entire chain. So she's going to move forward one more time. Good. And back again. So that position with the knees together is more unstable. It's going to be more challenging. The last variable we'll look at is rope length. So with rope length, if the ropes are closer to the ceiling, that's always going to be easier. If they're closer to the ground, that's always going to be harder. To see this, we'll look at a different exercise. So Soraya's going to move the straps to her hands. Now our ropes are a ways off of the ground. She's going to lean forward. We're going to do a push-up with the ropes further off the ground. So here she's going to do a push-up. She'll come forward, good, and then back again. So say that was too easy. You're doing the exercises, that's too easy. You want to make it harder. So we're going to lower the straps to the ground, which will make it much more difficult. So again, pull down and out on the free rope. Pull down on the lock box. We're going to go to about 5 inches from the ground and relock the box. Soraya's going to feel with her hands to make sure the straps are level. Again, she's going to lean forward and do the same push-up. Here the push-up is much more challenging because her center of mass is more in line with the gravitational line of pull. So it's much harder for her. In summary, these are the 4 variables we can use in kneeling to make an exercise easier or harder depending on your abilities. Our third position we'll look at is a supine position, which basically means you'll be lying on your back, face up. In this position, there will be, again, 3 variables we can look at that we can manipulate to make an exercise easier or harder. The first variable we'll look at is lever arm. Like we talked about before, if the attachment piece is closer to the hips, it's easier. If it's closer to the feet, it's harder. So here's a simple exercise. Jim is going to lift his butt up a bridge. He's going to lift up off the ground, pushing into the sling, good. And back down, so that's a short lever, it's going to be a bit easier. So if we want to make that harder, we'd go out to the ankle, same thing, he'll push down here and lift his butt. Good, it's a long lever, it's a bit harder. That's the first variable. The second variable we'll look at manipulating is instability. We started this exercise with his arms down at his sides. That increases his base of support. It makes the exercise easier. So again, he'll lift up here one more time just to show. Good. And back down. Now we'll have him cross his arms over his chest. This will decrease the base of support. He's going to push into the sling with his legs, lifting his pelvis. This makes it a bit more challenging. He has to work on balance a bit more. The last variable we'll look at changing in our supine position is termed additional movements. It basically means we're going to add extra movements to our original exercise to make it more challenging or less challenging. You can see in our setup I took our narrow sling off and put the straps back on. Our original exercise, Jim was pushing down into the straps and lifting his pelvis. Once he's up here, his additional movement is going to be spreading his legs out to the sides like that, and then he'll come back in. So he's doing this additional movement while holding the original exercise. This makes it more challenging. You'll see there will be a number of these additional movements throughout our exercise program. This is just one example. Our fourth position we'll look at is called the prone position. Basically means stomach down, the exact opposite of our last position. In this position, there are two variables we'll change to make an exercise easier or harder. The first one is lever arm. We've covered that in our last three. We'll show it again here. You'll also note that in this position I have a couple of pads under Jim's stomach. If you don't have these at home, you can use a pillow or something to protect the low back from arching too much. Coming back to our lever arm principle, we have a short lever here. The sling is closer to Jim's hips. It's going to make the exercise easier. So what he's going to do here is he's going to push his legs into the sling, lifting his pelvis up. You can see there's some space there and he's stabilizing nicely. Then he'll go back down. The second variable we can change in the prone position is adding additional movements like we did in the supine exercise. So we're still in this prone plank position. We've switched over to our straps. Jim's going to lift like he did in the original exercise. While he's up, he's going to move his legs apart into hip abduction as one example of an extra movement. He'll move back together and rest. So any additional movement on top of the original exercise will make things more challenging. Our final position we'll look at is a side-lying position. The only variable we're going to change in this position is lever arm. So here we've got Jim on his right side. We've got a short lever. The sling is just below his knees. In this particular position, we need to make sure the arm stays up on the side. The top arm, the bottom arm is going to be rested here and the head is rested. We need to make sure the body stays in a straight line, does not jackknife during the movement. So we've got our short lever. Jim's going to push his legs into the sling, lifting his pelvis, clearing the ground. We're making sure his spine is straight. He's not jackknifing. If that was too easy, we could make this harder by changing the lever arm. So we're lengthening the lever arm. We need to raise the sling a bit so we can go through full range of motion. Again, the same exercise with a longer lever. He's going to push into the sling and lift his pelvis. Good. Right there. So this concludes our 5 positions. We're now ready to move into our workout routine.